And we are back with part two of our interview with Lawrence alum and Appleton Mayor Jake Woodford. Jake, I want to talk about the advice you have for Lawrence students when they graduate, as well as what it's like to be the mayor and what you actually do as the mayor. But first, you became mayor at just about the worst time possible, right after the COVID pandemic struck. So, can you talk about assuming the office of mayor in a medium sized city, your first ever elected position during a pandemic, and the world was falling apart?
Well, when I was running, so I started running in the fall of 2019, and by December of that year, we started to hear rumblings of some strange illness that was spreading rapidly overseas, and paying some attention to it. And over the course of the next couple of months, it started to become apparent that we were going to have to contend with this. And so in Appleton, and in the campaign, one of the last large gatherings that we held was a candidate forum just before the primary in February. So initially there were like 11 candidates running for mayor of Appleton, and that whittled down to 9 or 10. And then the primary, of course, takes that down to 2. So we had this big forum at the Appleton Public Library. It was in the lower level of the old library, and the room was filled to capacity, just absolutely packed. In fact, they had to turn people away because it was so full. That was really the last big gathering that we had and would have, certainly in the campaign, and then for a couple of years thereafter. After the primary, we were into February, and by mid-March, things were really shutting down, and gatherings were being restricted and canceled. And I remember having a conversation with my opponent, and it was right around that March timeframe. We were supposed to have a League of Women Voters forum, and I called him and I said, "Look, I'm working at Lawrence, and we're starting to think through our plans, and there's a lot of concern about gatherings of people, and I don't think we should do the forum, at least not in the format that was prescribed, which was having a large gathering of people." And I said, I'd really like it if we could do this together, if we could be on the same page about this. And to his credit, he was absolutely on board with not doing the forum. It was interesting because at the time, the league was really committed to doing the forum. It's a core part of what they do in the community. And Jim and I agreed that they could go ahead and have their forum, but they wouldn't have any candidates there, and it'd be up to them to decide how they wanted to handle it. So ultimately, we didn't do the forum. We did one virtual forum or debate, if you will. But anyway, I took office in April of 2020, and this was still pretty early in the pandemic in terms of what was known about the virus and transmission. So this was, the time when broad lockdowns were in place, and people were washing their groceries, and surface transmission we thought was
Right.
a factor. And so it's just a really weird time to start a new job, and especially a role where ultimately there was a fairly limited federal response in terms of a unified response. And ultimately, a lot of the decision-making authority rolled right down to the local units of government. And so I found myself in a new job, in a new place, with a workforce that, by and large, I still didn't know. We have 650 employees at the city of Appleton, and I was doing virtual introductions with different employee groups. And so it's just a really strange moment. We were operating in emergency government, so the council committees were not meeting, and many services have been suspended. And it was just figuring out, okay, how do we restore as much normalcy to our operations as we can and safely can? How do we get systems up and running and in place to be able to function fully and continue to protect our workforce and the community so we can keep existing, doing what we do. So that was enormously challenging. And then on top of all of that, we got to May of 2020, so just about a month later, and George Floyd was murdered. And that set in motion a summer of unrest in our country and in the city of Appleton. So that was also just extraordinarily complicated in terms of how to navigate and try to hold a community together. And I learned a lot. It was an intense period of time and just emotionally and professionally exhausting, but really, really important. And I think helpful in many ways. So if there's a silver lining to that first year or so, it's that I, by necessity, learned so much about how the city government operates and how different departments approach their work. I got a crash course initially and then really deepened my learning about law enforcement and the role that law enforcement plays in municipal government and in community life. And, all the while trying to figure out, okay, how do we get through this pandemic? So I'm glad in a way that those experiences were front loaded in my time in office because it has really shifted my perspective in terms of, first of all, what is a crisis? What is an emergency? And what's a problem? And what's an issue? And what doesn't need much attention at all? My perspective on these things will be forever altered by those early experiences.
Yeah, I can't imagine much more being thrown at a newly elected official in their first 3 months than what you had to deal with.
It was a lot, but it also, in those moments, you really have to focus on the basics. So in that way, there were not many distractions in terms of what's not critical. Like there weren't. It was a very focused, very intense period of time.
Can you talk about assuming the office of mayor in a medium-sized city, your first ever elected position during a pandemic, and the world was falling apart?
What was most surprising in a good way about being mayor?
I think there were a couple of things. First, I was pleasantly surprised by how knowledgeable and passionate the city workforce was and is. It's an incredible group of people. It's a group of people, municipal employees, that really it runs the gamut. And so we have people who are doing physical work, frontline physical work in the field, to people with terminal degrees in their fields, doing applied research and everything in between. And I've just found that there's such a wealth of knowledge and passion among public employees that unfortunately most people don't have the opportunity to see or recognize. And worse yet, I think there's a reputation for public employees that they're somehow disengaged or uncaring or dispassionate about the work that they do. I've found precisely the opposite in this organization, and that makes it really exciting to come to work every day and be a part of that. Get to work with people who are really genuinely fired up about what they do, no matter what they do. And I've found that time and again in this organization. So that is really inspiring and pleasantly surprising. The other surprise, and again, positive surprise, has been how by and large positive my engagements are with the community and with community members. I don't want to go so far as to say Appleton's special in this way, but I will say that when I talk to my counterparts in other communities in Wisconsin, even, their experiences are not the same in terms of the tone of engagement and the way that people approach them. And I'm sad for them, but it makes me really, really grateful to work in a community where people are kind and generally kind and respectful and appreciative. And so I've been surprised by how often when somebody's stopping me to talk to me, it's to say thank you, it's to be appreciative, it's to share excitement about something, it's to tell me something about themselves that's important to them, they think I ought to know. That happens more times than not. So that's been a really pleasant surprise.
Do you get recognized and approached a lot? Like you're shopping at the grocery store and people know who you are? Or...
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, so in the early days when we were wearing masks and I could go to the grocery store and put a mask on and have a hat on and
Yeah.
kind of fly under the radar, but not so anymore. It's a strange experience to say be out for dinner and look around a room and see eyes. So, that it's a little jarring at times, a lot to get used to, but I really take it as a positive thing. People know who their mayor is. So yeah, I get recognized all the time. That's just part of the deal.
Okay, and then it sounds like you're very open and happy to be approached. So,
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Ty, that some of the ways that people engage with me, I hope reflect the way they feel about the way I engage with them and the way I engage with the community. Goes back to what I was saying earlier about the tone that leaders set in their organizations and their communities. And if there's one thing generally true of people and of communities, it's that people are deeply perceptive. Deeply perceptive. So they know if I'm telling the truth. They know if I care or if I don't care. They know if I'm committed or not. They know. And that's something that I deeply respect about people. It's something that I think a lot of public officials, elected officials, politicians miss is that people know. People know. They know what's true and what's not and who's being honest and who's not. And so I have a lot of respect for that, a lot of reverence for that. And I also feel a lot of responsibility as a result. It's like you're not getting anything past people and you better not even try.
Tim Hanna was your predecessor. He was mayor of Appleton for 24 years. Do you want to make some news here today and announce plans for your political future? Do you hope to remain mayor of Appleton for a while? Do you aspire to higher political office? Might we one day have a chance to vote for a President Woodford?
um, so first on President Woodford, no.
no, okay.
As I was talking earlier about partisanship and
Oh,
and
that's right. Yeah.
one of the things I really like about this role is it's nonpartisan. I would say right now, I just not only do I not feel compelled to run for partisan office, I find it repellent. I recognize that in our system of government, having political parties is an important organizing principle, and that's fine. So I don't mean to disparage political parties entirely. I'm not particularly interested in being a part of it at this point in my life. In terms of how long one serves in a role like this, there's a lot that any of us think about when we're in a job. And I think in many ways it's the same for a role like this, in that if I'm growing and I'm learning and I'm passionate about what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm adding value to the organization that I'm in, the community that I serve, well, then that tells me I'm in the right place and doing the right things. And I need people around me, and I have people around me who I know will tell me if I get to a point where that doesn't seem to be true anymore, that I'm not able to bring value in the same way that I used to, and it's time to do something different. I also think with elected roles like these, there's enormous value in new perspectives and turnover. So I think there's also, even if you love what you do and you're passionate about it, at some point it gets to be time where new perspective and new leadership is healthy for an organization, for a community. That's my goal, is to not overstay. And also, I'm 34 years old, and so I have a lot of career ahead of me. And
Yeah.
according to McKinsey research, the average tenure in a role these days is about 2.5 years.
Right.
So I'm already bucking the trend, going into my second term in office. I love what I do and I'm passionate about it, and I hope I'm continuing to add value for the community. And while I'm doing that, I'm proud to serve in this role. Ultimately, though, it's not up to me how long I serve in this role. It's up to the people. That's something too that elected officials sometimes forget, is that ultimately you serve at the pleasure of the electorate. And so I completely respect that. And I think that's an essential tenet of American democracy. So yeah, I have no intentions of overstaying or otherwise disrespecting the will of the community, because if people think it's time for a change, then they'll let me know.
Mr. Mayor, you've been very generous with your time today. So just one last question, and that is, what are your tips for Lawrence students? What should they be doing now? What should they be thinking about as they get set to graduate in about 6 months and then head out into the world?
There are so many different paths that we can take. The beauty of a Lawrence education is that it prepares us for thinking, and it prepares us for exploration. Whatever you think your path is going to be, by all means pursue it. But also, I think, keep an open mind about the possibilities for career and life. Think about the real opportunities that exist, and especially, if you're thinking about government or public service, there's just such an enormous range of options and different kinds of work that are deeply meaningful and important, in whether it's local government, municipal government, or otherwise. You may not know about those paths right now. So mayor's kind of an obvious one, but within our own organization here, I mean, there's just so many different career paths, and you may find yourself in a career path in public service that didn't show up when you were choosing your major or completing your course of study. And we have Laurentians working here at the city of Appleton who work in our Department of Public Works, work in our police department, and their course of study on the surface might not have lent itself to the kinds of roles and career trajectories that they're now on. But I can tell you that studying at Lawrence and having the opportunity to learn in the way that we do at Lawrence has prepared them really well for the work that they're doing now in this organization. And they are leaders or will be leaders in the work that they do here. And so there's just huge opportunity in public service. I would also say there's some things about work that we don't necessarily think about when we're just getting out of school, but the kind of long-term considerations for career and life are really important. They may not feel important when, it didn't feel super important to me when I was 23 years old and taking a job at Lawrence, but over the course of a career, they really matter. And those things are about work-life balance, and they're about retirement savings and health insurance. And in public service, there are a lot of great opportunities from those perspectives that sometimes get overlooked. So I would just encourage you, if you're thinking about a career in public service, ask lots of questions. I actually just this week had a meeting with a Laurentian who reached out. He found out that I might be open to talking to Laurentians, which I am. And he reached out and said, "Hey, could I stop by and talk?" And so he came over and we had a meeting, and we talked about some of these things. That is so valuable. And I can tell you, it's not something that happens all that often, where somebody gets in touch and says, "Hey, I want to learn more about the work that you do." And I love those opportunities. And I know I'm not alone in that. There are a lot of people in a lot of roles in a lot of organizations who would love to share what they do, how they got to be where they are, and are just waiting to be asked. So don't assume that very busy people are going to be too busy to answer your message or sit down and talk with you, because then you're guaranteed to not have a conversation. If you don't reach out in the first place, you're guaranteed to never have the conversation. But if you do take that shot and reach out, there's a much better chance that somebody's going to get back in touch with you and say, "Yeah, I'd be happy to." Or if I can't do it, here's somebody who can. So don't underestimate the power of those networking conversations, even if there's no real end in mind, right? It's not like you're reaching out because you want something other than to learn about what they do and what kind of work their organization does. So those would be a couple of encouragements for folks who are thinking about career in life.
Yeah, those informational interviews that you just described are huge, and students should definitely do them more than they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appleton Mayor Jake Woodford from the Lawrence class of 2013. Thank you so much for joining us on the Lawrence University Career Center podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.